When I first moved into the neighborhood, the house next door caught my attention. It wasn't the kind of attention you'd expect. Nothing about it stood out in the way a lovely garden or a freshly painted facade might. Instead, it was eerily still. The yard was overgrown with knee-high grass, the windows were boarded up, and the mailbox hung crookedly, its flag perpetually down as if no one ever sent or received letters. What struck me most was the second-floor window. The curtains were drawn, but I swore I saw them shift. At first, I tried to write off my unease as moving jitters. After all, this was my first home, and there were bound to be quirks in the neighborhood I'd need time to adjust to. Still, something about that house didn't sit right. During the day, it seemed lifeless, abandoned even, but at night, shadows moved across the windows in fleeting, ghostly ways. I told myself it was just my imagination. After all, who would be living there in such disrepair? Weeks passed, and my curiosity grew into obsession. I started paying closer attention to the house. I'd watch it from my kitchen window as I sipped my morning coffee or glance at it while mowing the lawn. What unsettled me most was the second-floor curtain that occasionally twitched, like someone was peeking through it. I wanted answers, so I began asking my new neighbors about the house. "You mean the one next door to you?" An older woman across the street asked with a raised eyebrow. "It's been empty for years. Belonged to an older gentleman who passed away. No one's lived there since." That didn't make sense to me. If no one lived there, who or what was moving the curtains? The next morning, I knocked on the front door, more out of frustration than anything else. No one answered, but as I turned to leave, I could feel eyes on me. When I looked back, the curtain was still. Was it all in my head? Later that night, I thought I heard faint tapping sounds against my bedroom wall, the one closest to the neighbor's house. I sat up, holding my breath. The sound came again, gentle but deliberate. I couldn't sleep after that. The rational part of my brain screamed that there was no one next door, yet every instinct told me otherwise. A few days after the tapping incident, I convinced myself that I had to be imagining things. Stress, exhaustion, it all seemed like a plausible explanation. The logical part of me decided to ignore the neighbor's house altogether, but ignoring it didn't stop the feeling that I was being watched. One evening, as I was walking up my driveway, I noticed something odd. The curtains on the second-floor window next door were wide open. It wasn't just unsettling, it was wrong. They'd always been drawn tight before, and now the empty room beyond was visible in the dim light of dusk. I froze, scanning the window for any hint of movement, but all I saw was the hollow emptiness of the house. Trying to shake off the unease, I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. That night, I heard footsteps, soft but deliberate, pacing back and forth outside my bedroom wall again. The rational explanation of shifting pipes or animals didn't hold weight anymore. Whatever was causing the sounds wasn't random, it was intentional. I gripped my phone ready to call the police, but something stopped me. If they came and didn't find anything, I'd only look paranoid. Reluctantly, I let the sounds continue, until the pacing stopped just before dawn. Things escalated a few days later. I came home after work to find my living room window open slightly, a window I never used. The latch was broken, but there was no sign of a forced entry. My belongings seemed untouched, yet the intrusion was enough to put me on edge. As I searched the house for anything out of place, my eyes flicked to the neighbor's property through the kitchen window. The curtains were drawn again. That evening, I stood at my window and watched the neighbor's house intently. Minutes turned into hours until I finally saw something. A figure moving behind the curtains upstairs. They seemed to pause, looking directly out at me, and then the curtain shifted slightly. Without thinking, I stepped outside, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. When I reached the neighbor's porch, I saw the faintest hint of movement inside. I knocked, harder and louder than before, the sound echoing across the yard. The door creaked open on its own, the hinges groaning painfully in the silence. No one was there, yet the empty darkness of the house felt oppressive. I stepped back, unsure whether to run or call for help, when I noticed footprints, fresh and unmistakable, leading away from the porch toward my own yard. The footprints unsettled me so much that I didn't sleep for days. I called a locksmith to reinforce my doors and windows, and even installed cameras to keep watch over the house. I expected the equipment to catch something, the pacing sounds, the shadowy movements. But night after night, the footage revealed nothing. Whatever was haunting me didn't want to be seen. It was a Thursday night when the tension hit its peak. I was brushing my teeth, the bathroom window partially open when I heard it. A faint murmur, like someone talking to themselves, coming from the neighbor's yard. I froze, gripping the sink tightly, heart pounding in my ears. Slowly, I moved to the window and peered out. The murmur continued, but the yard was empty. Then, as if sensing my presence, the sound stopped abruptly. Seconds stretched into an eternity as I waited for something, anything, to happen. And then, through the silence, I heard it. The unmistakable creak of my back door opening. I lunged out of the bathroom, grabbing the nearest object, a wrench I'd left on the counter after fixing a leak, and rushed toward the door. But as I rounded the corner into the kitchen, the door was shut. My cameras hadn't detected motion, the locks were still intact. Yet I felt someone had just been inside. Fueled by panic, I grabbed my flashlight and bolted outside, determined to confront whoever or whatever was responsible. I shined the beam around the neighbor's yard, searching the shadows near the boarded-up house. That's when I saw him. A figure, dressed in dark clothing, stood perfectly still in the center of the yard, gazing directly at my house. The flashlight illuminated his face just briefly, a pale, angular visage, his expression calm, yet deeply unsettling. Slowly, he turned and walked toward the neighbor's porch without a sound, disappearing into the boarded-up house as though the door swallowed him whole. I wanted to call the police, but something held me back. I couldn't explain what was happening, couldn't describe the terror this man evoked in me. Instead, I stayed awake all night, keeping every light on and waiting for the sun to rise. The following morning, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. Packing up my belongings, I prepared to leave, abandoning the neighborhood entirely. But as I carried the last box out to my car, I glanced back at the neighbor's house one final time. The second-floor curtain twitched, as if bidding me farewell. To this day, I don't know who he was, or what he wanted. I only know I was never meant to stay.